Hi everyone, this is Emily, and I'm taking a moment before the podcast begins to tell you about mine and Bernie's latest offering, the Summer 2024 Sprint Cohort. If you've been struggling with project delays, team misalignment, or constant setbacks, you should know that without a strategic approach, these issues can lead to missed deadlines, stressed teams, and lost opportunities. We have created a small group virtual event hosted twice monthly to give you the support you need to get through the summer and hit the fall season running. This offering has been 10 years in the making and is based on the solutions and systems Bernie and I have used to overcome these issues, build communities and relationships, and get the work done. If you're ready to feel like you're on top of everything that needs to get done, check out the link in the show notes, which leads to the sign-up page. It's intentionally priced at the same cost as a co-working desk so that it's as accessible as possible. Check it out, and now, on to the podcast. This podcast was brought to you by Nook Wellness Pods. They combine noise and light management in a personal space where people can withdraw to recharge, focus, and connect better. Check the show notes for more information. Now on to the show. Welcome back, everyone, to the Coworking Values Podcast. Today, we are speaking with Natalie Du Toit. Natalie, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So, hi, I'm Natalie Du Toit. I'm actually an Olympic and Paralympic swimmer. And I'm a digital marketer currently and a content writer. I'm currently with the European Coworking Assembly, just been working on some of the social media and a few other aspects.
Can you tell me a little bit about your connection to the European Coworking Assembly?
So yes, my connection would probably be, I think I was introduced to the European Coworking Assembly quite a number of years ago now. I'm probably going more than 4 years. And whilst I wasn't a co-worker as such, I worked partly on the marketing of the European Coworking Assembly and just helping out there. And then getting involved in a few of the projects. And one of them is the IDEA Handbook. That was something that came about. I'm disabled. I have an amputation and I acquired it later in life, so I wasn't born with it. But yeah, so it kind of stood out for me and kind of just, it meant something, and I wanted to do something that could possibly make a difference.
Now, one of the projects with the European Coworking Assembly has been the IDEA Handbook. And I've read the handbook myself, but maybe you could introduce it to our listeners, starting with the acronym. What does IDEA stand for?
So IDEA is inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And the reason why I say equity is a lot of people usually call it equality. And yes, so it is basically a workbook. And I think there are so many different, or there's so many challenging topics within those four, what would you call them, words. And from that, sort of this workbook was born in order for people to work through it, in order to understand more about what is it that's happening currently within their space and how they can possibly make changes that could help others or help those that are frequenting the co-working spaces and just help them transition into a better way of work.
Can you give an example of a way that the IDEA Handbook could be used in a work setting?
Absolutely. So the workbook is, first and foremost, you start with an audit and figuring out, do I have any part of inclusion, diversity, equity, or accessibility within my space? And once going through that, it then takes you stage by stage and how you can, the questions that you can ask and how you can start implementing a few more changes within the space.
As a person with a disability yourself, is there anything in particular in your work, in your everyday work, that the IDEA Handbook has helped or could help if more people used it?
Sure. That's quite a big question. I think the handbook is a handbook, and as the story of inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility unfolds, it is, each section unfolds dramatically. What I find in the accessibility space or the disability space, because at the end of the day, if we're working digitally, and that's part of my job, is a lot of the digital work, um, there is a lot of changes, but at the same time, there's a lot of people that have been set in their ways a lot. And it's being able to understand, how can we ultimately communicate with those people? Who is it that we're talking to? And I think that has been really, really important to me. And the more you delve into it, you actually realize how interlinked they are. As a disabled person, I've frequented a few co-working spaces here where I live in South Africa, and each one, playing a different role. But one of them the other day was actually up in town, and I had to climb quite a few stairs in order to get there. And then I had to climb all the way down to go to the basement to record. So it was quite interesting to try and think at the end of the day, how does someone, in a wheelchair, able to get into the space? And those are the types of questions that, once you start frequenting these places, you realize, which is different, and that's physical rather than the digital side of it. But I think every point in time, inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility actually plays a role. And coming from the sports space, and coming from a space where I was part of what we would call a showcase. And we used to go to international events, and there used to be only a few of us swimming, and we were there to showcase the people, what disability was about. And I think, the more you see, the more you open, the more I think you want to make it easier and make it better. And maybe those are the wrong words to say, make it easier, make it better. I think it's just to make it open for everyone.
Now, you mentioned a sports background, but I think we need to introduce that to our listeners. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Oh, perfect. Yes. So I was an Olympic and Paralympic swimmer. So I went to the Olympics as a disabled athlete. So that's one part of my side, or one part of me. And yeah, I came through a lot within sport. I came through a lot within, um, the sport was able-bodied and disabled together at first, and all competed under the Olympics, and then they separated. And then they tried to integrate the disability sport with the able sport. Say, for example, at the Commonwealth Games. And in 2001, no, sorry, 2002, I took part in Manchester, actually, at the Commonwealth Games. And that's where we kind of started as the showcase. And as time went on, more races were introduced for our categories. And I think it was a big eye opener, because, today there's a lot more races for the disabled people at able-bodied events, which is, I guess, could be a positive and a negative in many ways, because I've actually been at events where um, we've been told to swim an hour before the able-bodied swimmers, so that our events were done. So, it comes a long way, and there's a lot of questions being asked about it, and there's a lot of questions, I guess, that still can be asked about it. But at the end of the day, life is quite similar, in my way of thinking, and that is, as much as I have a disability, in sport we were never classed for the disability; we were classed for what we were able to do, and that's the way that I like to see it. Every disability is very, very different, and I also like to say, it's like a fingerprint. Um, but ultimately, you you can do pretty much everything everybody does, but at the same time, there are certain things that you can't. And sometimes it's challenging to hear that or to realize that. But at the end of the day, that's life, right? And we try and be a part of as much as we can. So yes, that's sort of my sport background, and moving into business. I went into crisis and reputation management, and then from there, into the digital marketing space, and the content writing space, and just loved it, being able to speak to different audiences and speak to different groups. And I think with that, it ties in well with accessibility, and bringing that to life.
Well, that's very inspiring. I'm wondering if there's some advice that you can give about if, say, there's another person who's listening now who's just downloaded the handbook. What's the best way to bring it to the people who are organizing the work? I mean, it would be simple enough if just that person was running everything, obviously. But what's a good way to integrate a team into adapting the IDEA handbook?
I think it's downloading the handbook firstly, or purchasing it and downloading it at coworkingassembly.eu handbook, and with that, I think it is taking that audit, and it is trying to look back and thinking about the real. What is it really? If the results come up, not so great, that's okay. But I think it is important to dig deep and find what it is your space needs, or what it looks like currently, and then also to understand and to start looking more at who is coming to your space. Who is it that you work with, that you deal with? In a lot of talks that I do, there's a lot of companies would say that a lot of people actually don't share that they have a disability, because some of them we can't see. And it's to just being open and start finding that openness within the people that are joined your space or coming to your space, or and from there it's then starting to work, and what are the sections that we want to focus on, and go through the sections. Obviously it's great to do the whole handbook, but it takes a lot of work. So it's to be prepared, and it's to go in at 100%. Don't try and just do one section. Start with the most important section, but go through the whole handbook, and just be very, very honest and be open with yourself, and then open yourself to those that you meet on a daily basis.
Is there a particular section of the handbook that means a lot to you, or that is especially personal for you that you would like to shed a little spotlight on?
So if I had to look at the handbook, and we were going through the handbook, it really struck a chord with me that it doesn't matter that I have a disability. It all kind of sounded similar. So when we speak about diversity and people going through the challenges within the section of diversity, we're all going through very challenging moments, and challenging times. And I think it is all the same kind of feelings, but it's important how we deal with that. And furthermore, I also realized that ultimately, I would have a disability, so that would probably work into inclusion, that would work into diversity, into equity, and I always love the picture of equity, because it's always, if I can use the example, because I have a disability, I'm often given a disabled room at a hotel. And it's probably the worst thing for me because they have wet bathrooms, and I have to take my leg off and hop on a wet bathroom. So, it is interesting that people also, their mind goes to disability, and there's a disabled room, we'll give them a disabled room without understanding the underlying reasons for the disability, or maybe just asking if someone needs a disabled room, for example. So I just noticed that every section of the handbook actually pertains to any problem, and I use the wrong word, problem, to any situation. So I think from that perspective, it is to see inclusion. What is it that I want to achieve with inclusion? Let's understand what inclusion really means. Let's understand what we want to achieve with inclusion, and that's where the handbook is really good at, is understanding it along with what it is in your life that you need it for. So yes, I think the trick behind the handbook was, the more you go through it, the more you realize every section actually runs into one another, and can actually make a difference in each of the other sections.
It sounds like you're discussing a more holistic approach to addressing the needs of people with disabilities or who have different learning styles or different working styles, whatever might be needed for that working situation. Can you tell me a little bit about what's at stake if companies don't adapt?
It's really challenging because at the end of the day, in sport, we have policies and procedures. Whereas in co-working, there won't necessarily be a policy and procedure. When we speak about women's rights or having women, um, in leadership roles on boards within companies, usually there is a policy that says we need at least 50% women on the board. So, a lot has come about because we've made sure that those positions are available and those positions, nobody can take away. Whereas, IDEA is very different in its sense. It is a sense that you need to feel it because you believe it will make a difference. You believe that, it will change your space. It will attract more people to your space. And we know that stats, points to that. We know that, stats points to the more diverse we are, the more successful the business is. And those are stats in the handbook as well. So I think, with knowing all of that, know that it is a great task. It's a big task, and it is not something that is forced. But at the end of the day, it will do amazingly well for your space or for the people within your space. So it's not always just a one-way street. It is more than a one-way street. So yeah, I think, from that perspective, it is just to take it on board and to run with it.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that, Natalie. Where can people find you online?
So I'm under Nat Du Toit under any of my social media platforms. And, they can share just a DM with me and I'll contact them back. But at the end of the day, I think it is really just important that, people start opening up a little bit. In South Africa, if I can share, we drive a lot here, and I remember as a kid playing a game of, how many red cars do you see on the road when you're driving, and with that, you start realizing how many more red cars are actually on the road compared to what you thought were on the road. When I became disabled, I realized more and more how many disabled people there were out there, and currently sitting at 15%. So, it is important for people just to, think about it and go with it. And at the end of the day, everyone has been touched by something, and everyone in their life has had experience somewhere. And it's just to use that experience.
Thank you so much for participating today. You've said a lot of very inspiring things.
Thanks for having me on the show.